Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Sorry guys, I remembered that I did not have wudu, so I needed to make wudu. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Almighty Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family, his descendants, his companions and followers, and the men and women that walk in their footsteps. And I ask Allah to make us among them. Ameen. Brothers and sisters, Jazakumullah khairan for joining us. This is the last session of the Tafsirah program, inshallah. And then, a couple weeks we're going to be in Ramadan, and we resume Tafsir, inshallah, after Eid. We usually give ourselves a couple weeks to recover. And then we get back to the swing of things, inshallah. But tonight, again, is session number 6 of Surat al Baqarah, the cow, which is the second surah in the order of the Quran. But if we think of Surat al-Fatiha as the introduction, then that essentially makes Surat al-Baqarah the first surah in the order of collection, as we see in the Mus'haf itself. But as I said before multiple times, Surat al-Baqarah is also the first that was revealed in the Madani period, if we consider Surat al-Mutaffifin to be the introduction to the Madani period. So either you look at the order of revelation or the order of collection, Surah al-Baqarah is fundamental, is extremely essential. I said that Surah al-Baqarah is basically the constitution of this ummah. It's the surah that details the laws, the rules, the regulations. It was revealed constantly throughout the Madani period, and you're talking about 9 years. So the backdrop of the Madani period, it was Surah al-Baqarah, coming constantly. Although the vast majority of the surah was revealed in the earlier Madani period, however, ayat of this surah, verses of the surah, continue to come down, continue to descend throughout the entire Madani period. And I said that the pivot upon which this entire surah hinges is the ayah that we will actually cover tonight, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa." I will appoint a trustee on earth. This is ayah number 30. And so we will get to that inshallah tonight, but I wanted to again repeat what I said earlier, what I said over the last month and a half, and that is this particular verse is the pivot. It's the fulcrum, basically, of Surah al-Baqarah. And the reason I said this, and the reason many scholars said the same, is that the theme, as I explained to you in the first 2 sessions, the theme of Surah al-Baqarah revolved around the concept of imaratul ard, the concept of basically cultivating this earth, cultivating the earth, for the purposes of God, making sure that this earth is a good place to live, causing the earth to thrive. So on top of that food chain is basically us. There's creation that is much larger than us, obviously, right? The elephants are bigger than us. The cheetahs are faster than us. The hippos are heavier than us, right? But that does not necessarily make them superior. Okay, what makes us superior is the intellect that was basically bestowed upon us from on high, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. And so that is what makes us superior. That's what makes us capable. That is what makes us on top of that food chain, able to subjugate the earth to our purposes. And so if man's purposes are aligned with God's purposes, then whatever it is that we do on this earth would ultimately be a fulfillment of the purposes of the Creator. And that is the intention of bringing man to this earth, is for us to do work on this earth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, we don't know exactly why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted this. He didn't tell us. Why this earth? Why this universe? Why that particular mission? Why that particular purpose? He did not articulate that in the Quran. He did not articulate that in scriptures. And therefore, it's not important for us today. I don't need to know the purposes of it. If you're a soldier in the army and your superior officers, they stationed you, at a particular frontier, and they gave you a set of commands, and they said, this is what I want you to do. Knowing the wisdom behind the command would certainly be helpful, right? It would maybe excite me a little bit more, but I should still carry out that command nonetheless, regardless, whether or not, I understand the purposes of the command. I should still listen and obey. And that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from us. So what He shared with us in the Quran is that I want you to become my khulafa. I want you to become my trustees on this earth. I want you to carry out a particular mission. And that is to cause the earth to thrive in a God-centric fashion. Remember, we said before that not every civilization is God-centric, and not every progress is God-oriented, okay? And mere economic growth is not necessarily reflective of moral growth. It's not necessarily reflective of happiness, okay? And so let's not be fooled. Civilization, imaratul ard, causing the earth to thrive, doesn't necessarily mean that we build skyscrapers and bigger buildings and faster cars. That's not necessarily what is meant here, because automatically the imagery that comes to mind, about an established civilization, the imagery that comes to mind about progress is usually this advanced picture that is derived from a sci-fi movie, from some type of a futuristic understanding of the world, where people are wearing fancy clothes, there's very fast cars, there's weird-looking buildings and robots everywhere, and, people are hovering around, right, and doing teleporting and things like that, the reductionism is quite irritating sometimes, because what it is ultimately is that we're saying that moving faster is good in and of itself. Who says that driving 75 or 155 miles an hour is necessarily better than riding a horse? Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide that this understanding of the world is somehow... Who gets to decide that the world today is somehow in a better place than the world 500 years ago? Who gets it? We've become extremely efficient in our oppression. We've become extremely efficient in our tyranny. We've become extremely efficient in our instruments of killing. We've become extremely efficient in destroying the environment. We've become extremely efficient in the extermination of biological life. Right? That the world is not necessarily a better place, and we are not necessarily more civilized than we were, 500 years ago. Okay, that is not necessarily true. We want to believe that. We want to believe that we are better today than we were before. We want to believe that we have laws. We want to believe that we have human rights. We want to believe that we're better, right? But if you look at the state of the world in general, I think that we've just become, if you think of the atrocities that took place in the 20th century, right? A couple hundred years after the rise of modern democracy, right? If you look at the Holocaust, if you look at, Secretary Mao in China, if you look at about 35 million peasants, in the expansion of communism in China. If you look at, King Leopold and what they did in Africa, if you look at Stalin, and if you look at World War I and World War II, all fought by democracies, right? And so progress, advancement in technology and science and transportation and having screens and having computers and having all of that does not necessarily mean that our civilization is God-centric. Okay, it centers around something, but it is not necessarily God. And the opposite is not true either. Okay, perhaps an advanced civilization that has the best technology, that has the best cars and the best buildings, could still be God-centric, right? And so we're not saying no to technology. Okay, we're just saying that there's a separate essence to what makes a civilization a God-centric civilization, and that essence is not necessarily its capacity for war, or its capacity for faster transportation, or its capacity for faster processing computers, or its capacity for to produce more food, or factory farming. That is not what makes that civilization a God-centric civilization. And therefore, if I see modern civilizations have reached the height, I should still ask myself, are we in a God-centric time? Okay, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. I will appoint or establish a trustee on earth. Are we fulfilling that mission? And if we can't fulfill that mission, at the level of, countries and nations and so forth, are we fulfilling that mission in our own community? Are we fulfilling that mission in our own families? Okay? So you ask yourself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to be His trustee on this earth, to be a khalifa on this earth. Am I doing God's purposes in my own family? Am I achieving God's purposes in my own community? Are we a God-centric community? Or are we a community that is defined by its desire for expediency, its desire for instant gratification, its desire for, what brings faster results, right? And so again, Imaratul Ard is the theme of Surat al Baqarah. And because Surat al Baqarah was revealed at the very beginning of the Madani period, it defined the Islamic civilization as it was being built in the Madani period. It basically defined everything that came after. And it does not mean that Muslims were perfect either. At some point, we did a job well done, and in other points, we fell behind miserably. Okay? Because the Quran sets an ideal to aspire for. It does not dictate action. It tells you this is where you need to be. Now, whether you walk through the door or not, that is up to you as a human community. That is up to you as the believers. It's up to us to exert that type of effort. Right? And one of the qualities of that civilization, that God-centric civilization that puts the purposes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before our instant gratification, before our purposes, before nature's purposes, one of the qualities of that civilization is that it is a shared responsibility, as I said before, between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and human beings. Building it is a shared responsibility. It's like going back to the example of a soldier, right? The commanding officer has a particular directive, has an objective, has a goal, has an agenda, has a plan, right? And this plan usually reflects the intentions of the politicians, the intentions of the political leaders, right? But the soldier also is the one that carries the weapon, is the one that drives the tank, is the one that stations himself or herself at the post, okay? And so at the very end of the day, when we win the war, and people ask, who is responsible for winning the war? On the one hand, we will say, yes, it was the great planning of the commanding officer, but on the other hand, we will also say that it was the execution of the good officer, the good soldier that followed, the commands of the commanding officer. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us on this earth to take our commands from Him, but use our own human effort to carry out those commands, to execute those commands, right? It wasn't angels that came down on earth to do God's work. He could have done that. That's not what He chose. He chose to put Adam in charge of this affair. He wanted us to carry out that mission, right? And if He wanted us, human beings with limited abilities, with passion, with temptation, with desire, with all kinds of issues, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to be that being for a purpose, right? And I shared before 4 sections of the surah, okay? And those are the 4 sections that will stay with us, inshallah, for months. But section 1 particularly had 2 categories. One of them was the fundamental prerequisites of causing the earth to thrive, okay? And I said that the most important prerequisite, again, remember, we're talking about a God-centric civilization, the most important prerequisite is Iman. There has to be strong faith. You have to have faith in God. People that, operate, again, sometimes you ask some of these millionaires, why are you making so much money? They're surprised. Do I need to provide a reason as to why I'm making so much money? Because making so much money is, in and of itself, the end goal. Making money is the end goal for them. They don't think twice about it, right? Actually, if you ask them, they'll stop and think, I've never considered that question before. I thought that making money is the goal, is an end in and of itself. Do you and I believe that? We don't believe that. We believe that there has to be a purpose behind everything, and that purpose needs to be a divine purpose, right? And so it is faith that defines these things. It is faith that helps us make those determinations, all right? Is this something that would further the cause of God on this earth or not? If the answer is yes, then okay, I can engage in that. And if the answer is no, I better go do something else then. Okay? But if God is removed from the picture, all it is really is just good old Darwinism. All it is just, survival of the fittest, natural selection, just wild beasts, sinking their claws in each other's flesh every single day, right? Mauling each other, because everyone in that arrangement becomes a threat. So rather than working with or becomes an opportunity to exploit, right? Again, if you want to become successful in a world that is not God-centric, every other human being is either a threat or a resource for you to exploit, right? That's it. You can't think, or maybe perhaps your immediate family, maybe your spouse, your kids. Okay, those ones maybe deserve a little compassion on our part, but everyone else, falls in one of those two categories. But in a God-centric world, in a God-centric arrangement, I always ask myself, what is God's objective here? And then I find other human beings that I can collaborate with in order to carry out my mission more effectively. I can't do it by myself. I need other fellow descendants of Adam to work with me on this. Because, again, this is what it entails to think of the world as a God-centric arrangement. So in ayat 1 to 5, we talked about Iman. We talked about faith and what that faith means in its very, very essential levels. And then from 6 to 29, we covers the antithesis of faith, which is, the four categories. Remember? We talked about kufr, which is the overt rejection of faith. We talked about nifaq, hypocrisy, which is the covert rejection of faith. And we talked about hayra. Hayra is confusion. People who are confused. They're still searching, so to speak. So ayat 6 to 29 provide us with the greatest and most important prerequisite of building any civilization, which is strong faith. We talk about faith itself, Iman, and we talk about what counters it and how to respond to that and so forth. And we also said that one of the most fundamental prerequisites of building a civilization that is God-centric is to learn from the experiences of those who came before us, right? And there are three particular experiments that are mentioned in the surah, all in section 1. There is the Adamic experiment, right, which is important in its own right. There's the Abrahamic experiment, which is extremely important, but comes second to the Adamic experiment. And the third one was the Israelites, or the Hebrew experiment, right? Two of these experiments describe, what it takes to build a successful civilization. And one of them describes what you should avoid in the process of building a God-centric civilization. And inshallah tonight I wanted to at least start the conversation on the Adamic experiment. Of course, this is going to take us a while in order to cover it all. There's so much that is involved here. But I will scratch the surface, inshallah, tonight, and we'll take some of your questions and then cover the rest, after this beautiful month of Ramadan is over. The Adamic experiment is the most foundational of all, right? This is the one upon which, everything was built. It's the one that sets the tone for everything that comes afterwards, right? And it is, it posits the human being as, on the one hand, the placeholder of divine wisdom, of insights, of enlightenment, and so forth, but also one that is potentially capable of tremendous agony and melancholy, right? And so the Adamic experiment poses itself again as this incredible host of so many lessons. If you follow those lessons and learn from them, you do well. And if you ignore those lessons, you bring suffering upon yourself. And that is when we jump into ayah number 30. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Behold, your sustainer, your Lord, said unto the angels, I am about to establish upon earth one who shall inherit it, one who shall be my trustee. Okay? I will comment on why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says ja'il and not khaliq. There's a huge difference between those two things. If Allah meant creating something from scratch, He would have said khaliq. He said ja'il means I will appoint or establish. Okay? There's no time. This is a very lengthy discussion that I want to have with you guys, but I can't do that tonight. But I will comment on that at some point. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here says, I will establish or appoint a trustee of mine on this earth. Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I will appoint Adam on this earth, essentially He declares His intentions. He pronounces His intentions very clearly before He creates Adam. Okay? As I mentioned to you before, the biblical narrative, the premises, the tenets of the story are the same. Right? Adam, Eve, Satan, expulsion from paradise, and so on and so forth. It's the basic tenets of the story are the same. But as they say, the angel is in the details, right? The angel is in the details. It really is the details that define everything, right? So in the Bible, it suggests, and again, the Bible was translated from one language to the other over the centuries. And so sometimes the essence of, or the meaning of the story, the gist of the stories is often lost. But if we at least look at the King James Bible, which is the one that is used by most Protestants today, and I think the Catholic Bible resembles that as well. It would say something like God wanted Adam and Eve. He created them to be with Him. He created them to be in paradise, in the Garden of Eden, right? He created them to be in heaven. They were not meant to be on this earth. They were not meant to be in the space-time continuum of our universe. They were meant to be with God. They were meant to be in the ethereum. They were meant to enjoy the Lord's company. And because they made a mistake, and that mistake, by the way, was originated by who? Who sinned first in the Bible? Hawa, Eve. Eve sinned first in the Bible. And then Eve goes and she starts whispering in her husband's ear, let's eat from the forbidden tree, let's eat from the forbidden tree. You guys know the story. So, eventually, just to stop her nagging, he, according to the story, he decided to just, acquiesce and go eat from the tree, and then God basically punished them both. The intentionality of God is lost a little bit in this story. Wouldn't you agree with me? God had a particular plan, and He was in the process of executing that plan, and then He was almost like surprised. He was astonished. He was blindsided by human action that He did not expect. So that engendered His wrath. He became very, very angry, and He goes to Adam and He questions him. And how could you do this? And then Adam apologizes, and then God is like, get out of here. Right? And He kicked them both out. It's slightly distasteful when you think of God in such light. Again, this is not a cheap take on Christianity. This is not a cheap jab, right? I think most Christians would even attest that something happened to the meanings of the Bible as it was translated over the centuries, from one version to the other. So, I think that something was lost there in the story. Now, if you look right here at the get-go, this is the very first ayah in the discussion. There's the very first one, and the very first one makes it very clear what God's intentions were, right? Before He even created Adam, He goes to the angels and He tells them what? Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. My plan is to establish a trustee on earth. A trustee that I will appoint on this earth, that I will entrust, a trustee that I will give a particular mandate, a trustee that I will hand marching orders, a trustee that will come to this earth and will do the work that I ask him to do, okay? To cause the earth to thrive, imaratul ard, right? Now again, like I said earlier, we don't know exactly the wisdom of God behind all of this. We don't know exactly why he wanted to appoint flesh and blood like us to be doing his work on this earth. Why not the dinosaurs? Why not the squirrels? That is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not tell us. And, therefore, if Allah remains silent on this particular matter, then the only way to get actual answers is, inshallah, in the afterlife when we stand before God in Jannah, and we can ask him all the questions that we want, right? Meanwhile, we just have to understand that we are soldiers on the frontiers, and we've been handed our marching orders, and we've been handed our commands, and we just need to follow that. But here's the thing. It is the absolute most incredible thing, though, okay, that he chose us. Wouldn't you agree? He still chose us. I may not know exactly why. Like, Lord, of all the beings, you chose me. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose us. He saw something in you. He saw something in the weak. He saw something in the sinner. He saw something in someone that has bad temperament. He saw something in every single one of us. He saw something in those who pray and those who don't pray. He saw something in every single person on this earth that person, he or she, they are capable of doing my work on this earth. Okay? Now, sometimes the person that gives you the task believes in you more than you believe in yourself. Isn't that true? Like someone will come to you, I want you to do this thing. Oh my God, I can't. I'm completely incapable of doing this. Trust me. Trust me. Don't sell yourself cheap. You're capable. You're better than this. Trust me. Okay? One of the greatest doors of shaitan is for us to think less of ourselves. And for us to think too highly of ourselves. All right? But if we think of ourselves the way Allah thinks of us, then we are right in that happy medium in which we need to be. You think too much of yourself, you veer into the side of arrogance. You think too little of yourself, you veer into the side of meekness and weakness, right? But if you think of yourself, hey, I don't know what he saw in me, but he must have seen something, and he is God, and I will just surrender myself to his wisdom. So every time and by the way, history, if you look back at history and you look back at the great figures in history, if you look back at, look back at Napoleon, or look back at Genghis Khan, or look back at, Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, or look back at the great scholars, the great conquerors, the great scientists. Look back at the great inventors, okay? Every single one of them was not born from their mother's womb thinking that they would conquer half the globe. They never had any concept in their minds that they would receive the Nobel Prize one day. They never thought of that, okay? And so it's okay for you to think that, well, I'm not like those guys. But every one of those guys used to be an ordinary person at some point or the other. And because they surrendered themselves to the process, that's why they achieved what they needed to achieve. So at some point or the other, you need to embrace that enlightenment, that openness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as it comes, right? Some of us started off, they had very humble beginnings. And now they have PhDs, and now they are moving millions of dollars in the market, and they're making massive investments and so forth, right? You have to believe in yourself in a manner that is conducive to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala believed in you, okay? And so I think that we should take this as a source of great honor for us, that Allah Azza wa Jal appointed us. Always remind yourself of that when you lose your temper, when you act angrily, when you act petty, when you hurt others, when you engage in unbecoming activities, when you engage in vain talk, when you engage in idle times, right? Achieving absolutely nothing. Like, the clock is ticking, and I need to fulfill my mission on this earth. Remember, God appointed me. He wanted me to do something. one of the pieces of advice that they give people with depression, or people who are suicidal. So people who are suicidal, some of them still have faith, and some of them, they've lost their faith. And if you encounter someone who is suicidal, obviously the first step is to make sure that that person is not going to hurt themselves, right? To make sure that this suicide ideation, whatever they call it, that is not going to translate into actually inflicting physical harm on yourself. Some people hate the world, they hate themselves, they're upset, they're depressed. Maybe they're going through something, and then inshallah maybe they'll recover. But they'll always tell you, but hey, I'm here, and that's that. I know that suicide's haram, so I will never take my own life, but I don't see the point. What is the point? The point is that for as long as there is a breath of air in your chest, your mission on this earth has not been fulfilled yet. And it is only when that mission is fulfilled, even if that mission is for you to be a nuisance to others, to be a source of irritation to others, to be a test or a trial to others, right? Hopefully not. But right, is that? That's our mission, right? Again, I don't know exactly what my mission is. I know that the overall parameters of that mission. I know that Allah wants me to be on this earth, to be His trustee, and to do some good work, to cultivate the earth and make the earth a better place. I do that through my masjid. I do that through my job. I do that through my business. I do that through my career. I do that through my neighbors. I do that through social media, whatever it is. There's multiple platforms in which I do what I can, okay? So if someone is having suicide ideation, but that person is not a threat to themselves, and so, you can have conversations with them, always remind them of that, okay? You're alive for a reason. If God thinks that you're done, He would have taken you, because there's, if it is your ajal, if it is the extent of your life, you're not going to live for a second after, as the Quran says, right? And so we're right here on this earth, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appointed us for a mission. And sometimes I need to remind myself of this, because it wasn't just Adam, it was the rest of us by extension. And that is the most incredible thing, as well. And that's why it is shocking to see the response of the angels. Like, here I am talking about great honor for man, and great honor for human beings, and great honor for Adam and stuff like that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appoints Adam and makes Adam His trustee on earth and gives Adam the mandate of that great mission. And then the angels scream, قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء. In ayah number 30. Lord, will you appoint someone that will spread corruption, that will spill blood, that will hurt people, that will hurt each other and spread mischief? Subhanallah, what an ill opinion they have about us, right? It's a justifiable opinion, but still hurts. Still hurts. Subhanallah. I mean, we think of angels, we think of these beautiful creatures made of light, these pure beings, right, with wings and who have this indelible desire to always serve God, and this relentless regimen of worship, and they perform beautiful functions in our lives. They're the ones that come to our aid, all again instructed by God. They have no will of their own. They have no desire of their own. They have no knowledge of their own. Everything that they know is what they have been taught. Okay? They don't pursue anything except that which God made them pursue. And so, on the one hand, we think of the angels in such a positive light, but on the other hand, we also think of the angels as the ones that thought that we were bad. And they kind of were right when you think about it, right? So they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Lord, why are you going to establish a creation that will spread mischief and spill blood? Essentially, the angels have this very pure, innocent nature. They think that the only meaning of existence is to worship God. They think that the only meaning of existence is to celebrate the praises of God, is to, do dhikr and ibadah and worship and stuff like that. And so, because they thought, again, they don't have any knowledge than that which God has given them. And because they thought that the only purpose of any existence, because they only know about their own, is to worship God. When God tells them, I will put somebody else to be in charge of my affairs on earth, they will automatically assume what? That they have fallen behind. That they have fallen behind. They're not concerned that God is creating someone else. They're just thinking, maybe we didn't do what we needed to do. Maybe God is appointing another trustee because we're not good enough. And so that was their only concern. This is not questioning, God's decision. This is rather, the angels being, as humble as they could be. قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء. Lord, will you establish on earth someone that will spread mischief and corruption and spill blood? وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. Whereas we are here extolling your limitless glory, and we praise you, and we hallow you, and we elevate you, and you will establish someone on this earth that will spill blood. قَالَ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to them and He said, I know what you know not. So, the grand master plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was such that a human being was going to be appointed on this earth. And that human being was our father Adam, alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needed a capable creation to cultivate the earth for him. And again, that's reassuring for you. By the way, Al-Qurtubi, for example, he goes like literally at a massive length making this comparison between, whichever is better in the eyes of God, human beings or angels, right? And then he actually provides different scholarly opinions and so forth, and he concludes that ultimately, even though angels worship God more effectively, but we are more favorable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because when we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are doing this out of will and choice. We have alternative routes, but we choose this one. Whereas when the angels worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they only do so because they are ordered, they are programmed to do so. Okay? And so, in some sci-fi movies, they have robots at homes, right, making food and cleaning the house and taking the trash out and stuff like that. Will you be more grateful if your robot takes the trash out or if your son takes the trash out? The robot will take the trash out very methodically, very consistently. But if your son takes the trash out 2 times a week, as a parent, you're going to be happy because you feel like, oh, they made a choice to help me out at home. But the robot is programmed to do what they're programmed to do. So you don't really think of the action as being moral as much. Because, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala favors you. You see, again, one after the other. You see what is happening here? He appoints you as His trustee on earth because He thinks you're capable. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala morally favors you because He thinks you are better than the angels. You're more capable than the angels, and you are better, in station than the angels as well. Ayah number 31. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first is, I want to appoint a trustee on earth. Okay. Now the trustee is appointed. The second order of business is to do what? Is to teach, is to educate. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. To teach Adam the names of all things. That word right there, that word, al-asma, the names, that word is the placeholder of all secrets. That word right there is literally where divine wisdom resides. That word, is the word that basically gives meaning to the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by appointing us. That is the word that makes Adam and his offspring the true heirs of divine knowledge, deserving and qualified. Okay? What is that word? What is that absolutely mysterious word that drove the scholars nuts over the centuries? All the commentators, all the classical scholars, they have gone back and forth trying to understand the meaning of the word al-asma. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءِ He imparted unto Adam the names of all things. Al-asma'a kullaha. What is al-asma'a kullaha? What is the names of all things? Sorry? Oh, I thought someone just wanted to save me the trouble and answer the question. Right, so here's what the scholars said, and again, the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, the later generations, they've had so many different opinions about it. But I'll share with you some of what they said, right? Some of the scholars said that al-asma'a kullaha means the languages, tongues. It means multiple languages, presumably that Adam had knowledge of all languages that would come after him, and that, seems slightly implausible to me, knowing that languages, if you study anything about the science of linguistics, languages evolve from each other, right? So essentially, every language is usually traced to a predecessor. And so it is more than likely that Adam alayhi salam spoke a particular language, and then over the centuries that language evolved, and more words were added, and so it takes different turns, and every turn, it evolves into a separate language that has nothing with the other language. Actually, and some of you will probably frown at this concept, many scientists, they look at linguistics and the evolution of language the way they look at biology and Darwinism. Are you familiar with the concept of speciation? So one of the tenets of Darwinism is that we all have a common ancestor. And I bring this up because we will have to talk about Darwinism. We will have to talk about the theory of evolution when we talk about the creation of Adam. Because the theory of evolution is often posited as antithetical to the story of creation. And that's why a lot of people lose their faith in this day and age. They're taught one thing at school, and they're taught something completely different at the masjid. And people who believe in creation, they're often dubbed as unscientific and foolish and backwards and superstitious. Whereas people that accept Darwinism, and evolution in general are looked at as, scientific and empirical and philosophical and sound and intellectual, okay? And so who wants to belong to, a group of weak-minded people? And that's why a lot of people, especially in the younger generations, they are veering off towards atheism, because one of the main reasons is this whole thing. So I will talk a lot, about Darwinism and evolution, but, just a little tidbit for tonight. In one of the tenets of Darwinism is that we all have a common ancestor, and this common ancestor, gave rise to offspring, and because of the circumstances of nature, offsprings would be separated. All right, and so let's take, for example, a colony of cats. Okay, this is a colony of cats. There's like 25 of them that lived together, and then an earthquake took place, and a fissure separated 10 cats on this side and 15 cats on that side, right? And so now there's this canyon between so the colony of cats was separated. You can see each other, them meowing at each other from like both sides of the, of the canyon, but now they can't reach each other anymore, right? Because it's hundreds of miles this way and hundreds of miles that way. So all they can do now is to survive away from each other. And Darwin would say over millennia, over thousands and thousands of years, the cats on this side will undergo certain biological changes, and the cats on this side will undergo other biological changes, and the two, even though they came from the same species, the two eventually become two separate species. That is the process of speciation. Okay? So Darwin would talk about it. And of course, people of faith will have different views about that. There are those who believe that every species was conceived by God before it came to this earth, in which case they would reject speciation. And others would say, I'm not opposed necessarily to evolution when it comes to, other biological forms. I'm just opposed to evolution when it comes to human beings. That's my only problem. Any other form of evolution, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me if squirrels evolved from cats. That doesn't bother me. Okay? Actually, squirrels probably evolved from rats or something like that. So they belong to that same family, right? And so we have different views and opposed views about this. So species in this understanding, in this, sort of like biological Darwinism, evolves when different forms of biological forms evolve from each other. They actually say that the same process happens with language. If mom and dad, they gave birth to 15 kids, and then 10 kids traveled to this country and 15 kids traveled to that country, and then they were now separated from each other, and they have offspring, and for thousands of years they're giving birth to children and so forth, the original language that was spoken by the parents will evolve into two completely different languages, given enough time. Okay? So again, this stuff is going to challenge a lot of your beliefs, and it's going to challenge a lot of what you've taken for granted, about the Quran, about creation, about biological evolution, and the diversity of life and so forth. We're going to talk about a lot of that, inshallah. It's going to be really exciting, often uncomfortable discussions. All right, sister? That's one of the things that I definitely have to address. It's just not tonight. I hope, inshallah, you'll be around and address that. But that's the tension right there. That's where the tension arises. Okay, there was nothing on earth, and then God put Adam and Eve right here. Okay, it sounds like a really interesting idea, but fossil record suggests otherwise. Fossil records. The Bible says that Adam and Eve walked the earth about 10,000 years ago. Well, with all due respect, the fossil record says that us, Homo sapiens, we've been around for about 198,000 years, something like this. And before us, there was, Homo erectus and Neanderthals and other, homos, other, beings, humanoids that walked on legs, right? And so how do we reconcile, those two seemingly contradictory things? That is definitely something that we're going to delve into, inshallah, at some point, but you're definitely asking the right questions. And so that is one possibility, that al-asma'a kullaha is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching Adam alayhi salam the languages of all things. But again, like I said, it seems slightly implausible that Adam would know French and English and German and Sanskrit and Hebrew and Arabic, that long ago. Again, it's possible. Some scholars did mention that. Other scholars said that these are actually the names of all things. Like, this is a tree, this is a chair, this is a field, this is a river, that's a mountain, this is the sun, these are the stars, and so forth. And this is actually Ibn Abbas's opinion. But when you think about it, it doesn't sound very different from learning languages. Because essentially when we learn language, what do we learn? We learn words in that language. We learn phrases and so forth in that language. So maybe Ibn Abbas did not mean all languages. Maybe he just meant that he was taught a language, right? So at least he was able to articulate his thoughts in spoken word, which his predecessors did not, presumably. Okay. Other scholars said that these are the names of all of the things that the angels did not know. So the angels had some limited knowledge that is confined to their tasks and their mandate, but they did not have knowledge about the other things, the rest of the things in the universe. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught Adam everything else that the angels did not know. That's one perspective. Some scholars said that these are the names of all of Adam's descendants. If that were to be true, in that Adam was an absolute utter genius, right? You know, there's all kinds of views about how many human beings may have lived on this earth, all in all, right? And some, estimations basically vary from 25 billion to 45 billion, something like this. All the human beings that ever lived here. It would be incredible if Adam alayhi salam memorized, if you have 6 kids, you're going to get confused about their names. Like, literally. What was your name again? In the Middle East, some of these families, they have like 15 kids. They literally, okay, 1, 2, 3, they give them numbers. They don't give them names anymore. But again, maybe miraculously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused Adam alayhi salam to know the names of all of his descendants. But also other scholars refer to the word ism, which is the singular of asma, as a reference to the essence of objects. Okay? So al-asma is not about the table being called table, or what's the Arabic word for table? Tawla, mindada, right? Whatever they use. Or this is carpet, and that's chair, and that's a light bulb or whatever. That it is not just the name of the object, but also the essence of the object, the function of the object, the meaning of the object, what the object is used for, right? So the chair has these hinges, and you kind of fold it like this, and when you fold it out, you're able to sit on it, and it's going to carry you up to 235 pounds. Okay, that would be what some of the scholars said, that this was a reference to the essence of knowledge itself. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him knowledge of the world, knowledge of logic, knowledge of reason, knowledge of computing, knowledge of performing basic tasks, knowledge of farming land, knowledge of herding sheep, knowledge of making weapons, knowledge of defending yourself, and knowledge of raising the children, right? Knowledge of the family relations and family lives and business and buying and selling and negotiating and so on and so forth. That al-asma'a kullaha is not the names of things, but rather the essences and the functions of things and so forth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately, regardless of which one you're looking at here, ultimately, what is it that God gave Adam at that moment? Knowledge. He gave Adam knowledge. He gave Adam ilm. And it is through knowledge that Adam became even further deserving. Remember, Adam was appointed from the beginning as God's trustee on earth. He still had nothing. He was an empty slate. And it was as an empty slate, literally you, like a baby still born to this earth, is still in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more sacred than anything else. You still don't have anything, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still elevated your station. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ looks at the Kaaba and he says that the life, the honor, the property, the liberty, the dignity of human beings shall be made more sacred in the sight of God than the Kaaba itself. At the end of the day, the Kaaba is just a building. It's just a symbol, right? But what deserves protection, what deserves preservation, what deserves to be honored is ultimately your fellow human being. Okay, your fellow human being. I don't know if you've known about there is a movement recently that is actually rising, quite a bit. It's called transhumanism. The movement of transhumanism still resides in very intellectual circles, but this is gradually making its way into wider society. And remember my words. You heard it first at your masjid from your imam. Okay? Before you heard this on social media, you heard it from me. Transhumanism, look it up. Transhumanism rejects all categories altogether. Okay? Remember, traditional thought believed in categories. We believed in the categories of male and female. You remember back in the days, the good old days when male and female were actual distinct categories, right? We believe in in the categories of sexual orientation. We believe in the categories of, this animal and this animal and that animal, and the human being was his own category, all right? So in the efforts of the postmodern, liberal ethos to completely remove the categories, right, so that there's fluidity of sexual orientation, fluidity of gender transition, everything is fluid. You can just literally do whatever they want. They want to remove the borders, fluidity of citizenship, fluidity of belonging, fluidity of religion. One day you're atheist, the other day you're Buddhist, the third day you're coming to Jum'ah, right? Everything is fluid, everything is cool. It's all cool. Do whatever you want, right? But that fluidity is now finding its way into the upper categories as well. Like they are eliminating now human beings as a category. We're not, and if human beings are eliminated as a category, then we are not necessarily more important than animals. So the well-being of the human being does not necessarily come before the well-being of an animal. And we started seeing this. We started seeing like some people who would create a trust fund for their dog. And their kids don't inherit anything. I was at a janazah recently. Some of you know who I'm talking about. He died. His kids got absolutely nothing. And the money went into the trust fund and is being spent on in my opinion, the most foolish things, right? And so transhumanism put us at a place where literally even the category of human, we think of ourselves as ultimately like the most important of God, of creation. Not anymore. Not anymore. And so making laws that protect human beings at the expense of animals, for example, are going to be challenged. Why should we we've always said, we'll protect the environment as much as we can, we'll protect animals as much as we can, but if I have to choose between the interest of the human being and the interest of an animal, I choose the human being. We assumed for the longest time that this is simply logical, but now that's not the case anymore. It's okay for you to be homeless. The cats are homeless. The dogs are homeless. Why do you think you're better than cats and dogs, right? So we are unfortunately getting into that, right? Which is really, really, frightening. And so Adam alayhi salam was granted that honor before he acquired any knowledge, because there was something innate about that being that made him and her, so near and dear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that honor was even multiplied when Adam received what? When Adam received knowledge, al-asma. Now there's another reason for Adam to be respected. There's another reason for Adam and his followers to be revered. Okay? And immediately, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. And then he presented all this knowledge to the angels. And he asked the angels, I want you to share with me the knowledge that Adam possesses. So the angels said, Lord, we would not know anything except that which you have taught us. So we don't know any knowledge of our own. And then he asked Adam to recite that knowledge in front of them, again, in order to reinforce that choice further and further and further. Now look at 34. The direct consequence of acquiring that knowledge was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevating Adam to this status that made it where the angels actually prostrated themselves before him. وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ أُسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ. A direct consequence. Again, one thing leads to the other. The appointment of Adam as a trustee on earth led to his receiving or acquiring of knowledge. And his acquisition of knowledge led to him being now deserving of the prostration of the angels. وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ. We instructed the angels to prostrate themselves before Adam. Subhanallah. Remember I told you earlier, that we should feel a sense of pride that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appointed us. Of all His creation, He wanted us to be trustees on earth. When life gets dark, when you're overwhelmed with financial problems, with relationship issues, when you have mental health challenges, when you're anxious and depressed, when you have a sense of purposelessness, when you don't know what to do, when you're stuck, when your back is against the wall, always remember this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored you and appointed you of all of His creation. And He could have created an infinite number of things, but He wanted you, the human being, with all of your weaknesses, with all of your shortcomings, with all of your trespasses, with all of your limitations. He wanted you to be His trustee on this earth. Always remember that and feel a sense of dignified pride, right? A sense of pride. I am God's most favored creation. I better apply myself. I better put myself to work to honor the one that has established me, right? But to add to this sense of dignity, remember what I said earlier about the angels? These beautiful beings, so close to Allah. I mean, in their devotion, they are the absolute best. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs the angels to prostrate. I want you to imagine that you're a sinner and God brings Yahya alayhi salam to prostrate to you or before you. That literally God will bring the most pious human being, the most righteous person, the most devout worshiper, and asks that person to prostrate before you out of reverence and out of respect. وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed the angels to prostrate themselves before Adam. And that, on the one hand, it set the record straight, but on the other hand, it also gave this incredible incentive to Adam alayhi salam, and hopefully by extension, his descendants as well. Elevated his station among all of his creation. He is the Khalifa, after all. He is the one that was appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do this business, his business on this earth, right? What type of sujood here, by the way? I know that for us Muslims, the act of sujood that we do with our foreheads on the ground and so forth is a very particular act of reverence that is only dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? But this particular act was actually commonly used by human beings throughout humanity. They prostrated before their kings, they prostrated before their parents, they prostrated before their shamans, they prostrated before their sages, right? Over the centuries. And only in the Islamic tradition that the act of prostration, where the forehead is brought to the floor, that is now being only dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't make sujood to anything or anyone else, right? So the scholars call this sujood al-taqdir. It's the prostration of reverence, as opposed to sujood al-ibadah, the prostration of worship. When you prostrate to Allah, you worship Allah. But when the angels were asked to prostrate to Adam, it was not the prostration of worship. It was, the prostration of taqdir, or the prostration of honoring him. And why was he deserving of that? Because he has what? He has something that they do not have, which is al-asma. Remember? He has the knowledge. He has the knowledge and they do not have that. What sets us apart, obviously, from each other is knowledge. What sets us apart is what we know. Okay? I feel like one of the biggest challenges of the ummah today is that we're struggling with our knowledge. We're struggling with the sources of knowledge. We're struggling with the authenticity of that knowledge. In the post-colonial era, I think most Muslims were pushed into professional careers. They were pushed into medicine and engineering and accounting and so forth, all the technical things. And the technical things, at the end of the day, these are the engines of a civilization, for sure. I mean, you need the engineers to build the bridges and to build the freeways and so forth. You need the doctors, you need the pharmacists, you need the actuaries, you need the accountants and the CPAs, okay? But all of these professional careers don't produce life-changing ideas, okay? You still have to work for someone. You still work for the philosopher. You still work for the politician. You still work for the social scientist. In fact, the engineer may even invent, but the usage of that invention is based in moral considerations, is based in philosophical considerations, is based in religious considerations that the engineer himself has nothing to do with. Tell me, we go to the engineers and we tell them, okay, take us from point A to point B, right? But the engineer does not define his or her own mission. The engineer is always given a mission by someone else or something, or some other corporation or whatever. We want to build this. Build it for us. Or here's a device, make it better. Okay? And that's a very important function. But we always have to ask ourselves at the end of the day, who do we all report to? Who produces the ideas? Who produces the priorities, right? Someone might say, well, it's the businessmen. I say, okay, well, hold on. The businessmen play an extremely important role, and that role is the bankroll the entire process. They are the ones that provide the financing of the process, but it still doesn't answer the question, who produced the idea? The idea comes from the religious leaders. The idea comes from the philosophers. The idea comes from the teachers. The idea comes from the social scientists. All the branches of knowledge that most Muslims are trying to avoid. If you really want to have a grasp of why we are falling behind, in terms of knowledge as an ummah, take a look at this particular perspective. It'll teach you a lot. Okay, engineers today, or doctors, or CPAs or whatever, they are performing an extremely important function and job and purpose for civilization. Okay, and someone has a passion to be a doctor, someone has a passion to be an engineer. That's great. Okay, but when we force our children or push our children to go into those professional careers and make it like this is the only successful thing that you could do, we are basically allowing people who are not Muslims to be the producers of ideas that we will all just eventually have to follow. And that is, again, a very dangerous state of affairs. All right, so what established Adam in that station was al-asma, the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him, which included the knowledge of technical things, but also the knowledge of abstract things as well. Now, there was an exception to that. All of those who were present at the moment, they prostrated, except Iblis. فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. They all prostrated themselves before Adam, except Iblis, who refused. And he basked in his own arrogance. Thus became one of those who denied the truth. He rejected. كَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. He was a rejectionist. He rejected. Wait a second. It says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا. We said to the angels, prostrate. When I say, I asked every man in the group to stand up, except Aisha. Would that make sense? Because if I said, hey, all men in the group, please stand up, except, naturally speaking, the exception has to still belong to the same group that I just identified earlier. If I said, all men here, please stand up, except Sister Aisha, number one, Sister Aisha will be extremely offended, because she'll assume that I included her with the men. Okay, or it creates a confusion as to which group really am I addressing or am I talking to. So here it says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا. I asked all the angels to prostrate, so all of them did, except Iblis. Naturally, we have to assume what? That Iblis is an angel, right? Yet the Quran later on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الْجِنِّ فَفَسَقَ عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِ. He was from the jinn. So which one is it? We have to answer that question, right? So all of them prostrated except Iblis said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will not frustrate. And in Surat al-A'raf, which we have already addressed years and years ago, in Surat al-A'raf, he says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you created me from fire, and you created him from teen, from the dirt of the earth. I am better than him. I'm not going to prostrate to him, right? Why is Iblis being included with the angels? Does he belong to the angels? Was he perhaps a guest? And if he was a guest, because some scholars, many scholars actually, including Ibn Abbas, said that Iblis was an angel, right? And the word jinn that is mentioned in the Quran later, jinn from Jannah anil ayn, meaning that he is not seen by human beings, but he's still, from the angels. And other scholars said that no, jinn and malaika, they're two different species, and jinn is made of fire and so forth. And inshallah, I will talk to you extensively about the different theories of all of this. But again, this beautiful drama that has been unfolding was suddenly interrupted by the screeching voice of Iblis, telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm not going to prostrate to Adam. I know that you've commanded me to, but I'm not going to prostrate to Adam alayhi salam. أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Why is he being included in this group? And why did he say no to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And what happened to Adam and Eve afterwards? And how did they eat from the tree and come to this earth? And how we can reconcile all of this with Darwinism and evolution will be the subject of our conversations, inshallah, in the upcoming weeks after the month of Ramadan. So I will leave you on this cliffhanger, and you're going to suffer for a month and a half. And I'll see you guys then, inshallah. And don't try to trick me and ask me questions about these things tonight, because I'm not going to answer them. So if you ask me about what we've discussed, inshallah, I will be able to address that. Jazakallah khair. I'll take some questions, inshallah. Any questions? Yes, please. All right. Maybe you still have to wait. Thank you. Very good question. So I actually should have mentioned that earlier. Jazakallah khair. So the sister is asking about, the angel's prior knowledge of human behavior. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically said that he was going to appoint a creation of his on this earth to be his trustee, the response of the angels is that they assumed that we will spread mischief and spill blood. And the question is, how did they assume? Okay? The scholarly opinions were quite interesting about this. Some of them said that they were actually taught that by God. It's just not mentioned in the Quran, that because angels only know what Allah taught them. So Allah must have told them somehow that some human beings are going to veer off the path and they're going to hurt each other. Other scholars said that the angels assumed, by virtue of human beings being his Khalifa on earth, that Khilafah, trusteeship, requires what? Requires what? Before that, to be a Khalifa of God on this earth, you have to possess what? Before knowledge, free will. You have to have free will in order to be God's Khalifa on earth. And logically speaking, if you have free will, sometimes you use that free will to do good things, and sometimes you use that free will to do bad things. So some scholars said that this was just a logical assumption, because he just told them that he's going to be Khalifa. Oh, Khalifa, that's different. Khalifa, that means they have free will, which means they can use their free will to disobey, because by definition, that's what free will is that you can use it however way you want. Some scholars said that war erupted on earth between the different tribes of jinn. And that, based on that experience, the angels kind of judged man based on the experience of people or other races such as jinn that fought each other, and they assumed that we would do the same, which sounds slightly implausible, because we're not them. Why are you accusing us of doing something? Just because the other race did it doesn't mean that we were going to do the same. More modern scholars made a reference, because again, this is where the Darwinism kind of plays into this whole thing. Some modern scholars said that this was the angels having prior knowledge of not human beings, but the predecessors of human beings. The Neanderthals and people that presumably came before Adam alayhi salam. Which one it is, there's going to be like one or two sessions that will be dedicated, inshallah, to that particular idea. I just wanted to get through the story first, as it is articulated in the Quran, and then, inshallah, we're going to talk about the consequences of that story and what it means. And in one particular perspective, again, the angels must have seen human beings in order for this to be a fair assessment, a just assessment on their part. They must have seen human beings who have engaged in this egregious behavior, and they assume that Adam would be the same. What does that say about Adam being the first human being, and what does that say about Adam being appointed rather than created, Khaliq versus Ja'il, and so forth? These are the things, inshallah, that we will definitely have to talk about. Yes. Mm. So it's a very, very simple, basic, fundamental question with a very simple answer. Okay, the commanding officer doesn't just tell you go fight the enemy. The commanding officer tells you what? Here's the map, here's the weapon, here's the training, here's the vehicle, here's the jeep, here's the tank. This is what you need to go. These are your coordinates. You show up at this hour and you leave at that hour, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just send us on this earth and He say, cultivate the earth for me and cause the earth to thrive for me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must have sent with us a manual of sorts. And that manual that gives you the exact mandate of your mission is the Quran. Right? So in order for you to know how to become a good Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ask yourself, am I acting in accordance with the injunctions and the rulings of God's book or not? And if I am ignoring the injunctions of God's book, then I am basically making my own mandate. I am definitely not, I cease to be the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anymore. I am doing my own thing here. But if you want to be the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you just have to follow His rules. Where do we find the rules? You find the rules in the good book. Yes?
I don't know if I'm right. Should I ask or not? If Allah Pak said to Farishtas He's going to make a Khalifa or create Adam to send it to the earth, but instead He sent it to Jannah.
Ah. See what the sister is saying there? See what the sister is saying? She's saying that he tells the angels, I will establish Adam on earth. Yet Adam still spent a little time in that place that is called Jannah in the Quran. That is called, this garden. Why? Is that a transitional period? Is that a training camp? Was there a purpose for this? Okay, great question. No, but I mean, the angels asked, we're asking as well, okay? If the angels asked, I think then we have the right to ask, 100%. That's a very intelligent question, by the way. And one, inshallah, I will definitely answer when we get back to this discussion. I don't know if my answer is going to be satisfactory, but I will definitely share with you my own perspective, on this. Just a little thing here. The word Jannah, by the way, may cause some confusion, because Jannah in Arabic, was mentioned in the Quran multiple times, like in Surat al Kahf, for example. Ashabul Jannah. Who are Ashabul Jannah? We translate it as the people of the gardens. We don't think of it as the people of paradise. Okay? The word Jannah sometimes is used in its linguistic sense, which means, a space that is hidden from prying eyes, usually by building like some, wind-breaking trees, or like confine it with something that prevents other people from looking inside. Okay? That is essentially the meaning of Jannah. So if you have your backyard, and your backyard is surrounded by a fence and trees, and so it's super private from your neighbors, linguistically, in the Arabic language, you can call your backyard what? Jannah. Okay? But then there's also Jannah, the other Jannah, the real Jannah that is really hidden from human perception, that is hidden from human assumptions, which is paradise, the Garden of Eden, Jannatu Adn. Are those two things the same? No. And consequently, the Jannah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Adam to, is that just another place that was hidden from prying eyes? Or is it paradise itself? The scholars actually address that question. And over the centuries, they were also divided as to whether or not this Jannah was paradise or it was just another place. So we will talk about that as well, inshallah. Yes. Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair.
I asked myself a question. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Malaika, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ مِنْكُمْ خَلِيفَةً, they would have gone crazy and they would say, no, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَنْ يَحْمِلْنَا. This is something that I think about. If he said minkum, they would be really completely gone.
Subhanallah.
The second one is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know that there is nobody that has knowledge amongst the Malaika or any other creation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, that he taught Adam. The teaching, not just the knowledge, the teaching is the elevation.
MashaAllah. That's a great thought. So brother is saying that the act of teaching itself, educating Adam, came directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore Adam was elevated not just by the content of the knowledge that he was given, but also by the very act of being the subject of the greatest teacher ever, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. That's a really beautiful thought, and thank you for sharing this. Absolutely. So if we were to add to the sources of pride, basically, we would definitely add that one. Yes. Correct. Yes, and they did have free will. Yeah, on missions. On missions, they controlled, they managed the wind, they managed the water flow, they managed the clouds, stuff like that. They have responsibilities on this earth, and so they are definitely familiar with what they see, and so according to some scholars, they've seen what free will leads to sometimes, and then they are basing their judgment off of that. They automatically assume that if a creation has free will, that some of them at least would engage in really bad behavior. Minkum, from amongst you. Then he would be appointing from the angels, as opposed to just appointing in general. Yeah. So if the brother was saying that had he directed that to the angels himself, it would have been the weightiest of responsibilities, on them. Like they would not imagine themselves being God's trustees on earth. He was saying. Sister, you had a question? Yeah, that's in Surat al Ahzab. Yeah, I mean that's a legitimate question, and so if given a choice between being a tree or being a wall, or being a human being, but sinless and innocent, or being a human being with free will but with the potential of doing either good or bad, which one would we still choose? I think almost every single one of us would still choose free will. I wouldn't want to be a wall just because a wall is sinless and innocent. I wouldn't want to be a wall. I want to choose to love God on my own. And I accept the risk that comes with that I will occasionally sin. And so, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in the ayah that Brother Hisham cited earlier, is that the amana was presented to the walls and to the trees and to the human beings. And the walls and the trees said, no, just tell us what to do, program us, and we're just going to, carry out the functions. But human beings, when we were still souls, before we come into this physical body, human beings accepted the amana. And a lot of scholars say that it is in that encounter between them and between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and us that He also made us testify, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And all of us testified. Okay? Indeed you are. أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. Lest you say on the day of judgment that we were unaware of this. Now you know, right? Now I've let you know. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that same encounter kind of made us also testify that He is our Lord. And that perhaps explains the nagging voice, the nagging yearning for God in the backs of our minds always. The believer yearns for God, and the atheist yearns for God. Every single one of us yearns for God in their own way. So
So do we know, like, was Adam alayhi salam appointed to us when we accepted the amana, like a before and after?
So there is a difference between you being in a primitive or a primordial form and you being in your current form as a human being. There's the minute of your birth, you existed before that. So your essence was created, your essence was created prior to that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created all the essences of human beings together, and then He made them testify, and then later on, in a particular order of His choosing, you came to this world, and I came to this world, and before us Adam came to this world, and so forth. So that was the physical creation, which is different from the creation of our essences that happened prior to physical creation. And so that conversation took place before physical creation. So Adam came to this world already knowing God, already testifying, has his fitrah and everything. Yes? Definitely. Jazakallah khair. So let me at least address the first question. So the word khalifa comes from the word khalafa, and khalafa means what? To come after, right? To come after, to be a successor of sorts. Okay. So when we say when they said to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Ya Khalifata Rasulillah, that means you are the Prophet's successor. You are the one that was made leader after him, right? And so, if I said that we are all the Khalifa of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, does that make sense? Maybe, in a way. In our own private domains, every single one of us is a successor of Rasulullah because we are the messengers of the messenger. Okay, not in any political way or anything like that, but all of us collectively as human beings, right? We are khulafa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning we do God's work because that is the task of a successor. What does a successor do? The successor carries out the work that the predecessor would have done themselves. All right? And so the Khalifa, the Khulafa, basically, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq continued the work of the Prophet ﷺ, Umar continued the work of Abu Bakr, and so on and so forth. Presumably, all the Khulafa kind of continued the work of those who came before them. That is essentially the meaning of the word Khalifa. That's where it comes from. As to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only used that word with Dawood alayhi salam and Adam, that's going to take a while to answer. So maybe you and I need to talk privately about this, inshallah, or maybe we address it some other time, because we need to stand up for Salatul Isha, if you guys don't mind. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر الإنسان في خسر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر